Welcome to the deep dive, where we take these huge, complex subjects, gather up all the sources, and really just try to give you the distilled knowledge.
The essentials.
Exactly. The absolute essential facts, the key insights, so you can walk away feeling like you've really got a handle on it.
And today, we are attempting to navigate a real maze of cinematic horror.
Oh!
We're tackling the Halloween franchise.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. I mean, this is an institution that has managed to terrify audiences across, 5 decades now? 13 films? And at least 5 distinct overlapping realities. It's a lot.
There is no question it's one of the longest running and, most commercially successful horror franchises in history. So today we are diving headfirst into the mythology, the mayhem, and frankly, the massive financial engine that is the Halloween series.
All centered, of course, on that seemingly unkillable masked figure, Michael Myers.
Or as he was originally known, The Shape, which I love.
It's so much creepier. And our mission here is, I think, pretty crucial because the continuity is just impossibly complex if you try to watch them all in order.
You can't.
You really can't. It spans the films, but also novels, comics, even video games like Dead by Daylight and Fortnite. So we're going to be your guides, distilling the most important creative and, commercial turning points that explain how this really simple concept just spiraled out into a cinematic multiverse.
Okay, so we're looking at 4 key areas, basically a roadmap to map out this chaotic legacy. First, we have to understand the blue pill, the revolutionary concept of the original 1978 film, this idea of unmotivated evil.
And then second, we're going to look at how Michael Myers fundamentally evolved, especially when the filmmakers decided to give this pure embodiment of evil, a motive.
Yeah. Then third, we'll take a hard look at the really bizarre breakdown of the story into all those multiple competing timelines. We're talking druid cults, anthology experiments, the works.
And finally, we'll get into the modern era and analyze the commercial necessity of the recent legacy sequels from Blumhouse, how their strategy of just ignoring 40 years of lore was maybe the only way to refresh this whole thing and guarantee its future.
Okay, so to set the stage, we have to go back, way back to the beginning. October 25, 1978, Halloween comes out. And the horror landscape had already been, fundamentally shaped by some giants.
Oh, absolutely. You have the foundational psychological terror from Hitchcock's Psycho in 1960. You have the visceral, gritty realism of Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 74.
And a big one people forget, Black Christmas, also from 1974, Bob Clark's film, which is a real proto-slasher.
It really is. But what director John Carpenter and his co-writer Debra Hill did was a kind of synthesis. They took all those different elements, the unsettling voyeurism from Psycho, the focus on teenagers in peril, that feeling of vulnerability.
And they just refined them. They boiled it all down into this incredibly cohesive, incredibly low budget, and, ultimately massively successful commercial formula that just defined the slasher genre for decades. All right, so let's unpack that blueprint, because the reason the original Halloween is an undeniable masterpiece wasn't its production value.
Definitely not.
And it wasn't the gore either. It was the complete, and I mean complete, lack of explicit violence.
That is the essential distinction. The whole film is built on this remarkable restraint. The terror comes almost entirely from psychological tension and the implication of violence, not from some graphic display of it.
It's all about what you don't see.
Exactly. Carpenter was a master of suspense. The sources describe his techniques as using delayed or withheld representations of violence, and what we now just call false startles or jump scares.
And that restraint is what makes the terror last, isn't it? He feels less like a cheap horror movie and more like this mounting oppressive dread. You spend half the film just scanning the background, waiting for the shape to appear.
And he does. But then he's gone the moment the characters turn around. Carpenter made sure that the audience almost always knew more than the characters did. We see Michael Myers lurking in the periphery, which just drives this intense anticipation.
People always compare him to Hitchcock, and it's a totally valid comparison.
Completely. Think of that famous scene where Laurie Strode is walking home, it's broad daylight, she seems safe, and then suddenly, bam, she's grabbed on the shoulder by someone she can't see.
That moment gives you an immediate visceral jolt. And it's played in almost total silence for maximum impact. But then the tension it resolves innocently.
Just Dr. Loomis.
Right. But Carpenter has already made his point. The fear of the impending act, the fear of that invisible danger, is way scarier and way more memorable than the actual bloody payoff. That is just masterful filmmaking economy.
And look, that methodology was born directly out of necessity. We have to emphasize the independent ingenuity here. This film is a monumental achievement for indie filmmaking because of the budget. It was produced by Compass International Pictures and Falcon International on an absolute shoestring.
A shoestring is right. One source puts the initial funding secured by financier Mustafa Akkad at only $300,000. Another one says it's slightly higher, maybe $325,000.
Either way, that's a number that just boggles the mind when you think about the film's cultural and financial footprint.
I mean, to put that in context for you, the original Star Wars came out a year before, and its budget was over $11 million.
So it forced creative decisions. They couldn't afford elaborate special effects or expensive sets. They had to use real locations in Pasadena, California to stand in for Haddonfield, Illinois.
Which meant they were shooting in May.
Right. So they had to manually scatter dry leaves everywhere and even paint them brown to try and evoke the feeling of autumn in the Midwest. That independent spirit, that need for ingenuity, is precisely what led to those immense commercial returns. The film launched a new paradigm that ingenious creative choices could dominate the market.
And some of the most enduring, iconic parts of the film came directly from that low budget. Specifically, the whole aesthetic of the killer, Michael Myers, the shape.
The creation of the mask is, it's foundational cinematic mythology at this point. The production designer, Tommy Lee Wallace, was tasked with finding a mask on a microscopic budget.
So what did he do?
He went to a costume shop on Hollywood Boulevard and settled on a cheap rubber mask of William Shatner, Captain Kirk.
For how much?
$1.98, less than $10 in modern money.
That's unbelievable. And the small modifications they made just changed everything.
They spray painted the mask this stark bone white, which instantly removed the humanizing features of Shatner's face. Then they widened the eye holes and altered the hair. Deborah Hill, the co-writer, said the goal was to make him almost humorless, faceless, this sort of pale visage that could resemble a human or not.
That blankness, that absence of personality or motive, that is the absolute key to the original terror.
He isn't a man, he's a void, an elemental force. And if the mask is the face of the killer,
then the music is his pulse.
Yes. John Carpenter composed that iconic minimalist score himself, mostly because, again, the budget didn't allow for an expensive composer or a full orchestra.
That 54 times signature, that constant simple piano melody, it's deceptively simple. A critic at the time called the score relatively simple and unsophisticated.
But then had to immediately admit it is one of the film's strongest assets. It becomes the unofficial anxiety-inducing soundtrack to the entire Halloween season. It's unnerving because it feels off. It's perpetually unsettling, just like Michael Myers himself.
So you have this faceless killer operating in this idyllic suburban town, relying on suspense instead of gore, all underscored by that pulsing 54 beat. Which brings us to the core dynamic of the entire franchise. The final girl, Laurie Strode.
Laurie, played by the then-unknown Jamie Lee Curtis, really embodies the final girl archetype that would go on to define the genre. She's presented as the observant, maybe slightly reserved teenager.
She stands in stark contrast to her friends, right, who are more distracted and, sexually preoccupied. She's the one who senses the danger, and she's the one who ultimately survives to confront the killer.
And this character, the lone survivor, sparked a massive academic debate almost immediately. The final girl trope in later slasher films became super moralistic. It often linked a character's survival to their sexual restraint or virginity.
But we need to be really clear about what the original creators intended for Halloween.
Yeah, Carpenter and Hill explicitly denied that moralistic reading.
Yeah.
Their explanation was purely practical.
The sexually preoccupied teens died simply because their focus was elsewhere. They were drunk or high or just distracted. Laura's survival came from her solitude, her introversion, which led to her being more alert.
Deborah Hill, who was instrumental in scripting the teenage dialogue, specifically dismissed that reading. She joked that what leaked into the script was just her Catholic sensibility. For them, it was all about awareness. Who is paying attention and who isn't?
That reframing is so essential to understanding the blueprint. Laurie is a smart, observant character, not simply a chaste one, but the concept still attracted intense academic scrutiny.
It did. While some feminist critics at the time viewed the entire slasher genre as just debasing women through the violence perpetrated against them.
Other scholars, like Carol Clover, saw the final girl as initiating a kind of feminist possibility.
Exactly. Laurie Strode doesn't just cower in a corner. She actively fights back against Michael Myers. She stabs him, she wounds him, she drives him off. Even if she is ultimately rescued by Dr. Loomis at the very end, she takes an initiative that so many female characters in earlier horror films just lacked.
And Jamie Lee Curtis's performance is so naturalistic. She admitted she initially wanted to play one of the smart aleck cheerleader characters, but she gave Laurie this genuine depth that just resonated with audiences and cemented her as this layered, believable hero.
And we can't forget the setting. The film tapped into these really fundamental fears about home safety by placing this immense, inexplicable terror right in the middle of a seemingly idyllic suburban town, Haddonfield, Illinois.
It becomes this powerful critique of the American dream, of certain social values. One source we looked at specifically suggests that slasher films like Halloween are mocking the concept of white flight to gated communities.
Yes.
They reveal that the suburban refuge is fundamentally flawed. Michael Myers, having been raised in that supposed safety, returns to terrorize it. He becomes a walking indictment of the perceived security of those places.
And finally, there's the holiday tie-in. Setting it specifically on October 31st merged cinematic horror with cultural anxiety in this really potent way.
Halloween already has these inherent themes of masks and hidden identities and the supernatural blurring the lines between what's real and what's not.
The deliberate choice to set the terror during this time just reinforced the cultural perception of Halloween as a season for genuine, visceral dread. A time when strange occurrences are initially dismissed because, well, it's Halloween.
So we have the perfect horror film, Michael Myers as the faceless, unmotivated, pure, evil boogeyman, embodying this primal fear of the unknown. That's the blueprint, but the film made so much money.
A ridiculous amount of money.
So of course the studio demanded a follow-up. And the necessity of generating a sequel, Halloween the Second, is what fundamentally fractured the identity of the entire franchise.
Yeah, the necessity of a commercial follow-up forced a major, painful narrative fracture. Halloween the Second, which came out in 1981, was a direct continuation. It picks up immediately after the first film ends.
Right on the same night.
The exact same night. And it takes place largely within the sterile, vulnerable confines of Haddonfield Memorial Hospital.
And you can see the success of the original right away in the scale of the sequel. The budget ballooned significantly. They went from roughly $320,000 for the original
to $2.5 million for the sequel. That cash influx changed the film's approach instantly.
How so?
Well, critically, Halloween the Second was immediately criticized for just ramping up the violence and the gore. The sources note that the filmmakers seem to be picking up a few tricks from their imitators.
They specifically mentioned Friday the 13th.
Exactly. Roger Ebert, for example, commented that the film didn't even try to do justice to the original psychological suspense. Instead, it just tried to outdo all the other violent Halloween ripoffs that had come out in the wake of the first film's success. The restraint was gone.
But the ultimate seismic shift, the one that would define the next 40 years of the franchise, was the sister twist. This was the pivotal retcon introduced in Halloween the Second.
The big reveal. Laurie Strode is actually Michael Myers' younger sister. She was adopted after their parents died, a couple of years after Michael killed their older sister, Judith.
That one decision fundamentally transformed Michael Myers. He went from being this elemental, unmotivated evil, this embodiment of pure randomness,
into a motivated family killer. He's now driven by a specific biological connection. The sequel provides the answer to Laurie's terrified question from the first film, why me?
And the answer is because you're my sibling.
Right. But wait, we have to pause here because the origin of this twist is it's genuinely legendary and almost unbelievable.
John Carpenter himself later disavowed the twist. He called the decision silly and foolish.
He did. He confessed he came up with the whole plot line when he was, and I'm quoting here, drunk and looking for more material.
And where was he looking for more material? For the sequel script.
No. To include in the NBC television cut of the first film. The network needed additional scenes and dialogue to meet the required running time. Yeah. He threw the sibling motive in as a quick, functional way to justify the sequel's existence.
That is just incredible. The defining motive of the entire franchise, the single most referenced piece of lore until 2018, came from him being drunk while needing to fill time for a TV cut.
It's astounding.
That fact alone just shows how carelessly the purity of that original concept was sacrificed for commercial necessity.
It speaks volumes. Carpenter admitted he came up with it purely as a function of needing to be involved in the sequel when he didn't think there was really much of a story left. He felt pressured to deliver something, and this was the easiest narrative hook he could find.
But the consequence, as we said, was enormous. Despite the creator's own disdain for it, the sibling motive became the defining narrative arc for decades. It changed Michael from a force of nature into a stalker obsessed with his bloodline.
And this shift drew heavy criticism from all over, including from Quentin Tarantino, who famously called the twist fruit from a poison tree.
Why that phrase?
Because Michael Myers was never intended to be stalking his sister. He was intended to be stalking anyone. This is the moment the franchise first splits its identity between pure horror and, like, a domestic melodrama.
Once Michael Myers was no longer purely evil, once he was given this specific, if flimsy, reason to kill, the franchise began this frantic, ongoing search for ways to sustain the mythology.
And that led to a dizzying number of reboots and retcons, culminating in the complex mess we have today. If you're keeping score at home, the sources indicate we can identify 5 distinct timeline branches.
5 distinct timelines. That is essential context for anyone trying to get into this universe. Let's just list them quickly so we can track the chaos.
Okay, good idea. First, you have the anthology arc, which is just Halloween the 3rd, that one-off experiment.
Right.
Second, you have the Thorn arc. This is the original sibling continuity, plus the whole druidic cult plot. That's Halloween 4 through 6. Third is the H20 arc. This was the reboot that came after Scream became a hit. It ignores films 3 through 6 and just includes H20 and Resurrection.
Then what?
Fourth is the zombie arc. Rob Zombie's 2 psychological remakes from 2007 and 2009.
And finally,
the Blumhouse arc, the newest one, a totally clean slate that ignores everything after the 1978 original.
that is a lot to process. And it all started right after Halloween the 2nd with the first and maybe the most bizarre attempt to reset the whole series, Halloween the 3rd, Season of the Witch in 1982.
Carpenter and Hill's original intention was for Halloween to become an annual anthology series, kind of like The Twilight Zone. Each film would be a new, standalone horror story tied only to the holiday itself.
And the third film was their big attempt at that pure anthology concept. They intentionally and very publicly excluded Michael Myers.
And the plot of Halloween the 3rd is it's genuinely wild. You have this character, Dr. Dan Chalice, who uncovers a conspiracy hatched by a man named Connell Cochran,
the owner of Silver Shamrock Novelties.
Right. And Cochran's plan was to use mystic powers drawn from fragments of Stonehenge rocks,
which he smuggled out of England,
and hidden computer chips
right
inside his company's Halloween masks.
His objective was an act of mass sacrifice. Cochran planned to mass murder children who were wearing the masks by activating the chips via a special TV commercial.
A commercial set to the tune of that infuriatingly catchy "London Bridge is Falling Down" jingle. The result would be the kids' heads dissolving and erupting with a gruesome mess of insects and snakes.
It sounds like a creature feature mixed with a technological paranoia thriller. It's just, it's so strange.
Critics at the time were largely baffled. They described the plot as deeply flawed, a hopelessly jumbled mess, and a fascinating but ultimately nonsensical detour.
And more importantly, the audience hated it.
They hated it. The film was a commercial disaster compared to the first two. It only earned about $14.4 million at the U.S. box office, making it the worst-performing film in the series up to that point. The shadow of Michael Myers loomed so large that the audience just rejected the anthology idea wholesale.
So the lesson was swift and brutal. The audience, as one source notes, wanted the Myers involved. That rejection led to a 6-year hiatus before the next film.
And the executive producer, Mustafa Akkad, who still controlled the rights, decided the only way forward was to bring Michael back. And that decision initiated the complex Thorn arc continuity.
This arc brought Michael back in Halloween 4, the return of Michael Myers in 1988. And to do that, it immediately had to write Laurie Strode out of the story.
Right. She was revealed to have died off screen in a car accident. So the focus immediately shifted to her young daughter, Jamie Lloyd. She becomes Michael's new primary target.
And by Halloween 5, she gains this chilling psychic link with Michael himself.
This whole arc was where the franchise truly lost its original identity. It just doubled down on the supernatural motives established by the sibling twist, and it all culminated in the highly controversial Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers in 1995.
Oh, H6 is notorious, not just for its plot, but for its hugely troubled production, which resulted in the famous split between the theatrical cut and the widely discussed producer's cut.
The film decided that the simple sibling motive wasn't enough. They needed a grander, denser mythological explanation for Michael.
And what they gave us was the druidic curse of Thorn.
This lore, which was vaguely referenced in the original 1978 novelization of the film, supposedly involved a druidic cult that existed throughout history. This cult would select an individual, the Thorn, who was then forced to kill their entire family on the night of Samhain,
the ancient Celtic festival before Halloween,
in order to somehow save the entire civilization.
It is an insane level of over-explanation for a guy in a white mask. They effectively turned Michael Myers from a relentless killer into a designated, cursed hitman for a secret society.
What's so fascinating is how the two different cuts of H6 try to resolve this dense mythology. The theatrical cut was a confusing mess because of all the reshoots. But the producer's cut,
which was bootleg for years before it finally got an official release in 2014.
That version provides clearer but equally polarizing answers. In the producer's cut, the mysterious man in black from the previous film is explicitly revealed to be Dr. Loomis's old colleague, Dr. Terrence Wynn.
And Wynn is the head of the Cult of Thorn.
Exactly. Wynn's cult protects Michael, the chosen one, providing the conditions for him to complete his murderous task against his own family line.
H6 also featured the final performance of the franchise's consistent anchor, Donald Pleasance, as Dr. Sam Loomis. His death required those extensive reshoots for the theatrical cut, which gave him a relatively simple end.
But the producer's cut gave his character an incredibly dark, mythologized farewell.
It completely broke the character.
It did. In that ending, Loomis approaches Michael, only to find out Michael has switched clothes with Dr. Wynn. Wynn, who is dying, then transfers the thorn symbol, the curse, onto Loomis's wrist, telling him, "It's your game now, Dr. Loomis."
The implication being that Loomis is now Michael's cursed caretaker. He's bound to this ancient destiny.
He just screams in despair, knowing he's now chained to the pure evil he spent his entire life trying to stop.
That dense, bizarre lore, which was seen by many as the absolute lowest point of the franchise's continuity, was immediately thrown out just 3 years later. The franchise performed its next pivot in 1998, entering the H20 arc.
The post-Scream era, Halloween H20. 20 years later was the clean break. It completely ignored the confusing events of films 3, 4, 5, and 6. It served as a direct sequel only to Halloween II from 1981.
And the driving force behind this decision was the triumphant return of Jamie Lee Curtis as Laurie Strode.
The sources suggest her return was the deciding factor in the continuity split. She was now living under an assumed name, Carrie Tate, working as the headmistress of a private school. She had faked her own death to escape Michael's relentless pursuit.
This was a direct response to the popularity of meta-horror that Scream had ushered in.
The H20 timeline tried to give Laurie a definitive emotional conclusion. It culminates in her apparently severing Michael's head with an axe.
But that conclusion only lasted for 4 years.
Because then we got Halloween. Resurrection in 2002. This film retconned the H20 ending by revealing that Laurie had actually killed an innocent paramedic who was wearing Michael's mask, not Michael himself.
And in the opening sequence of Resurrection, Michael Myers successfully murders Laurie Strode. He throws her off a roof.
That decision alienated so much of the remaining fan base, and the film itself just descends into absurdity. It features a reality TV show being filmed inside Michael's abandoned childhood home.
And yes, this is the one with Busta Rhymes.
It is, who at one point dons a Michael mask himself and performs martial arts while yelling, "Trick or treat, motherfucker!"
That low point led to yet another entirely separate continuity reboot, the Rob Zombie arc, with his remakes in 2007 and 2009.
Rob Zombie's approach was a significant departure because he wanted to rehumanize Michael Myers. His first film combined the elements of a prequel and a remake. It focused heavily on providing a psychological backstory, exploring the trauma and abuse that led young Michael to kill his sister Judith in 1963.
So a direct rebuttal to the 1978 concept of pure, unmotivated evil.
A complete rebuttal. Zombie felt Michael and other horror icons had become too familiar and less scary because they lacked explanation. Zombie's film showed Michael as a victim of a broken home and institutional failures. It gave the killer a human element, a depth of psychological pathology.
So he kept the sister twist.
He did. The 2007 remake identifies Laurie as Michael's sister early on, adhering to that Halloween II retcon. But Zombie's sequel, Halloween II 2009, pivoted heavily to focus on the psychological fallout on Laurie. It portrays her as a wreck, dealing with profound post-traumatic stress after the attacks. This whole arc, characterized by its gritty, brutal violence and focus on mental pathology, also ended after 2 films when Zombie declined to return for a third.
The state of the franchise by the mid-2010s was just utter chaos. You have 5 conflicting timelines, Thorn cults, resurrections, siblings, gritty remakes. The complexity had become a serious commercial obstacle.
It was impenetrable for a new audience.
So the only clear path forward was a strategic, radical, clean slate. And that arrived in 2018.
This new Blumhouse arc, initiated by David Gordon Green, served as the ultimate narrative reset. The 2018 film, also just called Halloween, is a direct continuation of the 1978 original.
And it ignores every single previous sequel.
Every single one, including Halloween II from 1981 and its defining sibling quest.
This is the great retcon re-retcon, and it was the most important decision they made. The highly controversial sibling relationship that had defined Michael Myers' motivation for decades was decisively eliminated.
The decision was intentional and explicitly woven right into the dialogue. At one point in the 2018 film, Laurie's granddaughter, Allison, dismisses the idea that Laurie and Michael are siblings as just something people made up.
Which is such a meta-commentary.
It's a direct choice to restore Michael to his intended state. Scarier if he had no motive, functioning once again as the undefined bogeyman, the Shape.
And the centerpiece of this massive revival was, of course, the return of Jamie Lee Curtis as Laurie Strode 40 years later. This time, the character wasn't a school administrator or a simple victim.
No, she was a survivalist, dealing with profound, decades-long post-traumatic stress and meticulously preparing for the final showdown that she knew, deep down, was inevitable.
Laurie Strode, despite having died twice in 2 separate previous timelines, was deemed absolutely vital to revive the franchise. The Blumhouse film was highly commercial, focusing on the dynamic between Laurie, who had become this prepared, obsessive reflection of Michael, and Michael himself, the returning Shape.
And commercially, the strategy was an immediate, staggering success. The 2018 film grossed $159.3 million domestically, making it the highest-grossing film in the franchise's history at that point.
And it set the record for the biggest debut for Blumhouse Productions. It proved that audiences, despite all the decades of convoluted lore, were just desperate to see a simple, pure rematch between the original 2 titans.
That enormous financial success led directly to 2 sequels, Halloween Kills in 2021, and the conclusion Halloween Ends in 2022. But this entire trilogy, while a commercial powerhouse, received highly mixed critical reception, especially Kills and Ends.
This is where we need to dive deeper into that critical split. Why, when the formula was so commercially effective, did critics start calling the films lifeless and soulless money grabs that failed to do anything innovative?
It seems to come down to expectation and narrative execution. Halloween Kills was criticized because it essentially shelved Laurie for most of the runtime. She's in the hospital.
Right. And the focus shifts to the town of Haddonfield, devolving into this nihilistic, vengeful mob trying to hunt down Michael.
Critics felt that shift making the entire town the protagonist, it diluted the focused terror of the original dynamic. It expanded the scope, but many felt it lost the intimacy that made it scary in the first place.
And then Halloween Ends provided the most divisive entry of the entire saga. It introduced a completely new character, Corey Cunningham, who encounters Michael Myers and is subsequently driven to take up Michael's murderous mantle.
The film spent a significant portion of its runtime focusing on Corey's tragedy and his transition, suggesting that Michael's evil could pass on to others, almost like an infection.
This was a polarizing narrative gamble. While it offered a thematic commentary on how violence spreads, critics and fans alike were frustrated that the final chapter of the Laurie versus Michael saga was being sidelined by a new character.
It was seen as innovative, perhaps, but ultimately unsatisfying as a conclusion to a 40-year rivalry.
But despite the mixed reviews for the sequels, the Universal Blumhouse timeline did attempt to provide a definitive, if controversial, closure. In Halloween Ends, after a climactic battle, Michael Myers is finally killed.
Or, maybe more accurately, he is destroyed, in a manner that seemed intended to be permanent.
He's crushed into a metal grinder.
Right. It was a clear attempt to provide closure for this specific continuity. But, given the franchise's history and the 5 distinct realities we've analyzed, we know that death is almost always temporary for the Shape.
Yeah.
The commercial pull of Michael Myers is simply too strong.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, after diving into 13 films, multiple reboots, remakes, and retcons across nearly 50 years?
Well, I think the primary takeaway is that the Halloween franchise is less a single linear story and more of a cinematic multiverse. It's defined by constant creative reboots and strategic retcons.
It's a franchise kept alive not by narrative fidelity, but by continually hitting the reset button to maximize that core dynamic of Michael Myers and Laurie Strode.
The resilience is just astounding. It exists across 5 distinct timelines, continually reset to leverage the raw, primal power of that original concept. And the financial engine remains enormous.
It's earned well over $800 million at the global box office over 45 years. It's one of the most bankable horror properties ever created.
And that longevity is constantly fed by ancillary revenue streams. We're talking toys, masks, video games like Dead by Daylight, and even integration into massive cultural platforms like Fortnite. The title itself, Halloween.
Which one source called the best title decision in the history of filmmaking?
It gives the franchise an instant commercial credibility that few other series can match.
The entire history of the series constantly revolves around one single creative question. Does Michael Myers need a reason?
That's it.
The moment filmmakers, whether it was the creators of Halloween the Second or the writers of the Thorn cult films or the Rob Zombie remakes, tried to explain him, to give him a family history or a druidic curse, they diluted the fundamental, frightening power of the original 1978 concept.
The greatest strength Michael Myers possesses, derived from that 1978 film, is his nature as inexplicable, unmotivated evil. That faceless mask, the one made from a $1.98 Shatner face, becomes terrifying precisely because it's a blank slate onto which you project your own deepest, most irrational fears.
So this raises an important question for you, the listener, to mull over long after this deep dive concludes. Which Michael Myers is scarier? Is it the cursed family pawn bound by a grand, ridiculous druidic destiny and a specific familial hatred, like in the Curse of Michael Myers continuity?
Or is it simply the blank, masked embodiment of the primal fear of the unknown just a man, lurking without motive in quiet, suburban Haddonfield, exactly as John Carpenter originally intended?
That debate over motive versus meaning is precisely what keeps the franchise and the character unkillable.
A perfect, terrifying question to leave you with.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Shape's fractured legacy. We'll see you next time.